My friend Lex Fridman recently just had Elon Musk on his podcast, and I gotta tell you, it's one of those conversations you have to listen to. But there was a specific part of the conversation where Elon starts talking about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and money, Dogecoin, many other things. I found it fascinating, so I figured that I'd just sit here, we'd watch it together, and I could fill in a couple of thoughts that I have around some of Elon's comments. Let's first start with his thoughts just around cryptocurrency in general. Here's part of the video.
I think the cryptocurrency thing is an interesting approach to reducing the error in the database that is called money. People often will think of money as having power in and of itself. It does not. Money is information, and it does not have power in and of itself. If you are stranded on a tropical island and you have $1 trillion, it's useless because there's no resource allocation. Money is a database for resource allocation.
I think that that's a great point by Elon. First of all, the idea of a blockchain, the idea of a cryptocurrency is to solve part of the money problem. It is to solve who owns what and who actually can send this digital currency to other people. It's the whole point of solving the double spend problem. His idea that money in itself is not powerful is also true. I love the example he gives here in terms of being on an island with all this money, not worth a damn thing. Money is only worth something if somebody's willing to take it from you and give you a good or a service in exchange. So of course, Elon, one of the founders of PayPal, really has thought a lot about money, has thought a lot about transactions, and obviously understands this to a degree that the average person doesn't. So that makes his next thoughts around Bitcoin specifically even the more interesting. Here's what he said when he started to talk about Bitcoin during the interview.
There is a fundamental issue with, say, Bitcoin in its current form, in that the transaction volume is very limited. The latency for a properly confirmed transaction is too long, much longer than you'd like. It's actually not great from a transaction volume standpoint or a latency standpoint. So it is perhaps useful to solve an aspect of the money database problem, which is the sort of store of wealth or an accounting of relative obligations, I suppose. But it is not useful as a currency, as a day-to-day currency.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is that obviously Elon is talking about the layer one of Bitcoin. And of course, they have about 10-minute block times. And if there's tons and tons of people trying to use the layer one, it's not super scalable. So fees spike and the wait time can be quite long. But that is true a couple of years ago. Now we have things like the Lightning Network, layer 2. And this is going to be true of all blockchains, not just Bitcoin, but every single blockchain is going to eventually run into the problem. You cannot scale a layer 1. You're going to have to use layer 1 for security. It's all about protecting the network, being as decentralized as possible. The scalability is going to come in at layer 2. And so if you look at something like the Lightning Network, you can have instantaneous cash finality settlements to those transactions, and you can do it for essentially no cost. So the scalability, the low cost, the high throughput all happens at layer 2, and it benefits from the security of layer 1. I think that Elon may not understand exactly what's going on with the layer 2, and he's just focused on the layer 1. The other thing that I think is really interesting is I've talked to a number of people who were either founders or early employees at PayPal, where Elon obviously thought a lot about money. And one of the things that I find interesting is many of them separate out the store of value asset from a medium of exchange asset. Now, in my opinion, actually, the holy grail is to be able to do both. If you think of the dollar, for example, it serves as a store of value, sometimes a good one, sometimes not. It serves as a medium of exchange and also serves as a unit of account. Those are basically the three aspects of money: store of value, medium of exchange, and a unit of account. Now, Bitcoin today is much better as a store of value than it is as a medium of exchange. But ultimately, so was the dollar at one point. The dollar was backed by gold. Gold was a great store of value. It sucked as a medium of exchange. Dollars were created on top of the gold as paper claims to that gold. The dollars were the layer 2. The dollars made it easier to have a medium of exchange. So ultimately, that's what Bitcoin is going through as well. We are only 12 years into this journey, and there's a sequence to the game. There's levels to this shit, as some may say. You start with the store of value at layer 1. That's all about security. You then build layer 2, and that's where you get medium of exchange with things like the Lightning Network. And then you continue to go from there. And so ultimately, I think that Bitcoin is following the exact same sequence that other forms of money have followed in the past. Elon then went on and started to talk about Dogecoin, which we know he's super excited about. And we know that he holds a very small portion of his portfolio in Dogecoin as well. So here's what Elon had to say about Doge specifically.
Part of the reason why I think there's some merit to Dogecoin, even though it was obviously created as a joke, is that it actually does have a much higher transaction volume capability than Bitcoin. The cost of doing a transaction, the Dogecoin fee is very low. Like right now, if you want to do a Bitcoin transaction, the price of doing that transaction is very high. So you could not use it effectively for most things, and nor could it even scale to a high volume. And when Bitcoin was started, I guess around 2008 or something like that, the internet connections were much worse than they are today, like order of magnitude. I mean, they're way worse, in 2008. So like having a small block size or whatever is, and a long synchronization time made sense in 2008. But to 2021 or fast forward 10 years, it's like comically low. And I think there's some value to having a linear increase in the amount of currency that is generated. If a currency is expected to increase in value over time, there's reluctance to spend it because you're like, I'll just hold it and not spend it because its scarcity is increasing with time. So if I spend it now, then I will regret spending it.
Stop it there. Here's two things that I think I'm pulling out of his comments around Dogecoin. The first is this idea that Dogecoin has higher throughput and lower fees. Well, the way that a blockchain works is that if nobody uses it, the fee is essentially zero because the fee is a direct response to competition for that block space. Now at the layer one, if you compare Bitcoin to Dogecoin, nobody uses Dogecoin and lots of people use Bitcoin. So naturally the fee is going to be higher. Another way to look at it is that even though Dogecoin's fees are nearly nothing compared to Bitcoin, nobody is still using it in comparison from an aggregate number of users or aggregate number of transactions. The second thing, obviously, is that the people who are using Bitcoin very frequently, they're starting to use layer 2 compared to Dogecoin's layer 1. So it's important to understand, yes, it has lower fees, but that is not necessarily a good thing. Obviously, if it was super popular, the fees would go up. And the reason why the fees are down is because it's not super popular as a medium of exchange. The second thing is that when we start to get into ideas around Bitcoin, you could increase the block size. You could make all of these changes. But the important part about Bitcoin is not only that the layer 1 is secure, that it's the most decentralized, strongest computer network in the world, but also that the monetary policy and the technical components of the actual blockchain are not going to change. What we know is that central banks need to be both independent and predictable in order to be effective. There is nothing more independent for a monetary policy than to be decentralized. No one person or group controls it. But also, to be predictable, you can't change. You can't have variables coming into your monetary policy. If you think about it in the United States, what's the next interest rate decision? Nobody knows. How much QE is coming next year? Nobody knows. But with Bitcoin, we know exactly what can happen. We know exactly what the design of the system is. And the inability to change it by any one person or group is part of the value prop. It is predictable. It's a programmatic monetary policy, and that is part of the value that people choose to understand and use Bitcoin as a store of value. Now let's continue with Elon's comments.
Some dilution of the currency occurring over time, that's more of an incentive to use it as a currency. Dogecoin, somewhat randomly, has a fixed number of sort of coins or hash strings that are generated every year. So there's some inflation, but it's not a percentage base. It's a fixed number. So the percentage of inflation will necessarily decline over time. I'm not saying that it's like the ideal system for a currency, but I think it actually is just fundamentally better than anything else I've seen, just by accident.
I don't know how much time Elon is spending on cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Dogecoin, etc. He's kind of a busy guy, been super successful. I'm a big fan. He's obviously built one of the most important car companies in America. He also happens to be launching reusable rockets and then landing them back on drone ships in the ocean. It's absolutely incredible. But I think that when it comes to this, part of his legacy knowledge around money, his legacy understanding of transactions, and his understanding of how the fiat system works may actually be somewhat of a liability. It's limiting the way that he understands how some of this works. Now, I don't disagree with him that the ideas of competition and experimentation are important in the industry, but I do think that he is underestimating the importance of Bitcoin, both the layer 1, the scalability of layer 2, and also the fact that the network effect has taken hold, and there are 100+ million people around the world that are choosing to use Bitcoin as a global store of value. Now, that medium of exchange use case that he talked about will continue to become more and more popular as adoption increases for Bitcoin, because as adoption increases, the volatility ends up going down. As volatility goes down, the opportunity cost of holding versus spending drastically decreases as well. One of the critiques, if I was Elon, that I would actually talk about in terms of preventing more and more medium of exchange use cases is that there's taxation on it. It's not like a traditional currency where if you go and you spend it, you don't pay capital gains tax. With Bitcoin, you do. Same with Dogecoin and others. So I do think that there are fair critiques of these assets, but I think that Elon's comments around money, dead on. He really understands money. He understands what makes it powerful. He understands what drives that value. He also understands generally blockchains and cryptocurrency. He realizes that this is a database technology that can help solve some of the problems with legacy money. But I do think that he's underestimating Bitcoin, and I hope that as he continues to learn more, that he'll continue to evolve his thought process. And I've got a big belief that Elon's eventually going to continue to become an expert on this topic as well.